Good? All right. If people comment on there and ask questions, just let me know. Okay, so everybody did no sugar? Yeah? We're all still doing it? Yeah. I know you're not doing it. We're all feeling amazing? Everybody survived? Awesome. Okay, so the big question is, where do we go from here? Because obviously the no sugar diet is not sustainable. It's not meant to be sustainable. It's meant to be a metabolic reset to help with metabolic flexibility within the cells. So today we're going to talk about where we go from here and how we can get back into a normal healthy routine. Because if you just spend a whole month suffering going through no sugar and then you just go straight back into your old eating habits, then we're just going to waste all of that, right? So we want to talk about now, how can we start to build this healthy diet that's going to support our goals moving forward with everything? So the goals today is we're going to talk about how we can create a healthy relationship with food, how to reintroduce carbs and when to eat them. We're going to review the common roadblocks to achieving your goals, and we're going to help understand how to build a lifestyle that supports those goals. So there's no two of us in the room that are the same. There's no two of us that have the same health goals or are starting at the same place. So if I were to tell every single one of you to eat the same, I'm going to be an idiot, right? Because we can't all eat the same. So we need to make sure that we're setting up a diet that helps to support our health goals. And we're not following 1,000 people on social media and TikTok who are giving you whatever you should be doing to save the world, right? It's very difficult. There's a lot of noise out there when it comes to diet. So we're going to talk about how to build a diet that makes sense from a physiological standpoint, that makes sense from your goals and where you're at in your life, essentially. So the problem here is we're being set up to fail. How many people have seen the food pyramid here? Right. Greg, do you mind grabbing my water that's sitting right back there? So this is what we all learn at a very young age, right? Down here at the bottom, we've got all of our carbs, breads, pasta, potatoes, rice. Thank you. We've got our vegetables and fruits here that we should be eating more of. Up here at the top, we've got our meats, poultry, fish, beans, eggs, that type of stuff. And then we've got milk, yogurt, and cheese. And then up at the top, we've got our fats, oils, and sweets. So for sure, sugars should be up there at the top. We shouldn't be eating a lot of those. But carbohydrates at the bottom should really not be our foundation. But that's what we've been told our entire life. And if that's the way that we should be eating, then metabolic conditions that are derived from food would not be the leading cause of mortality in the US right now. But again, we're being set up to fail. So if we look at what the MyPlate recommendations are, this is our current USDA healthy diet on the left side here. 65% carbs, 18% protein, and 19% fat. Who's been told that they should eat a diet with those ratios in the past? Yeah, we all have. It's fun to eat like that. It's easy. The food tastes good, but we're not really doing a whole lot for our health. Now, diabetes, which is a metabolic condition derived from too much sugar circulating, the American Diabetes Association, or the ADA, has revised this recommendation for people with diabetes. So if we know you have a blood sugar regulation issue derived from your diet, let's just eat 5% less carbs. We're still getting 60% of our calories from carbohydrates in this type of a diet, though. So we're clearly out of touch with what a healthy diet looks like. And that's what we're going to talk a little bit about right now, is why and how we got here. So the cause of this started in the 1950s when there started to become a link between high sugar diets and issues with our health. There was a study published in the New England Journal of Medicine in 1967 that basically concluded that fat and cholesterol were the causes of coronary artery disease. And this is kind of where we transitioned, and we've been sticking to that ever since. The reason for this is because the SRF, which is a sugar association, paid 3 Harvard scientists about $48,000, one of which was Dr. Mark Hegstead here. Now, $48,000 doesn't seem like that much money, but in the 50s, that was a tremendous. I'm sure Greg could calculate in his head and tell us how much that is in today's dollars. But what the Hegstead equation that was founded after this basically showed that saturated fats, like those in eggs and meats, increased our blood cholesterol. Now, I'm not going to sit here and argue with you and tell you that eggs and meat and things like that aren't going to increase your serum cholesterol. It's a very small amount. But the question then becomes, well, is cholesterol bad? Is that the bad guy that's causing all the issues? And overwhelmingly, we've decided or discovered through research and stuff that that is not actually the fact, right? Increased blood cholesterol on its own is not a very big predictor of mortality. So these guys were later hired for the USDA Nutrition Division from 1978 to 82, and they helped to draft the first copy of the USDA's dietary goals for the United States. So we know that there was some flawed research. If we look at what happened with that research, basically what happened was these researchers, they were setting out to prove Ansel Keys wrong, who basically said that dietary cholesterol doesn't have an effect on serum cholesterol. And they wanted to prove that this was not, in fact, the case. So these researchers basically took fats and oils supplied by Procter & Gamble and milk and ice cream coming from the Hood Milk Company. And that's what they used to develop the Hegstead equation, which predicted the relationship of fats in the diet and serum cholesterol. Basically what they did was they put these fats and oils into waffles, muffins, cakes, cookies, pie crust, biscuits, salad dressing, and spreads for bread. Now, what do all of those foods and things have in common? They're all carbs, number one. They're all full of sugar. Would anybody stand up here and try to argue that waffles, muffins, and cakes are healthy for you to begin with? No, so you're taking a bunch of unhealthy carbohydrate and sugar-rich foods. You're putting oil on them, and then you're blaming the oil for all the problems that come. So again, their focus was fat in the diet and serum cholesterol. Again, fat in the diet does make up about 20% of our serum cholesterol levels. We know that, but why are we making serum cholesterol out to be the bad guy? And why are we going to stick by this research that was done in 1965 when we know far and well that that's not actually what we need to be doing for healthy diets? So let's look at what happens if we eat the way that they want us to eat, where 65% of those carbs are coming from, or 65% of our calories are coming from carbs, 18% from protein, and 19% from fat. So what happens if we eat this way? I think I talked a little bit about this in the talk I did back at the beginning of January. I don't remember exactly, but I'm going to get a little bit more into it today. So what this basically shows is our blood sugar response after a meal. So postprandial glucose responses here. This little line here, that's going to be our healthy blood glucose range. So on a fasted level, we should be somewhere around the 75 to 85 range. After we eat, we want to kind of keep ourselves somewhere within this blue line there. What happens is if we eat a heavy carbohydrate-rich meal that's high in simple sugars and things like that, we're going to create a huge blood glucose spike. In a couple pages, we'll talk about the insulin response that follows that. But when we get these very large spikes, what happens is we end up trending downward and we end up overcorrecting. So that overcorrection brings us down below our healthy blood sugar level. And this creates postprandial hypoglycemia or reactive hypoglycemia, which is going to be what explains a lot of those like post-meal crashes and things like that, where we eat a big meal, gives us some energy. A couple hours later, we just have no energy, feel like we need to take a nap. That's because we're getting into this reactive hypoglycemic state, at which point we have to eat something more to return us back to this normal range. So this reactive up and down all the time is not very conducive for sustained energy levels. In fact, the short-term effects are decreases in energy, decreases in focus, hunger, and mood. And long-term is going to be an increase in oxidative stress glycation, which is where sugar binds to proteins and inactivates the proteins, inflammation, and weight gain. Just aside on the glycation stuff, because it's kind of cool. Glycation, basically the sugar binds to proteins. Proteins are formed in these four-dimensional structures. And when the sugar comes in, it changes that structure and it inactivates the protein, essentially. One of the highest percentages of protein in our body is the collagen and elastin that makes up our skin. So you see people who are old and their skin gets really saggy and full of wrinkles. That's because of the oxidation that's taking place over time. So we call these advanced glycation end states, which are ages for short, and it's what ages your body. So sugar has a direct negative impact on your skin because of that. So if we look at this, low glycemic foods, we've all heard of the glycemic index of food. So that's basically how much does this sugar or does this food affect my blood sugar and over what period of time. We want to stick more towards low glycemic foods. So low glycemic foods, they're going to have that glucose response. The glucose response is not going to be super overwhelming. And so because of that, we have time for this insulin response to come behind. Insulin is basically like the key that unlocks the cell, so the cell can then take in that sugar and then utilize it as energy. What happens in high glycemic food states is that blood sugar spikes super fast. Because of that, we get an overwhelming insulin response. That insulin then overcorrects, which causes our blood glucose to drop too low. This is what gives us that reactive hypoglycemia state. So anytime we're talking about carbohydrates and things like that, what I'm always focused on is what's happening with an insulin response. And I think we talked about that at the beginning of the month, that a lot of our metabolic conditions, so diabetes, heart disease, strokes, cancers, that type of stuff, are all linked to actually high levels of circulating insulin and not actually high levels of sugar. So every time we create this response, this high insulin response, again, the cells are going to start pulling in all that sugar. And in an ideal situation, the cells will be utilizing that sugar for energy. Now, what happens if I sit down and drink a Diet Coke, and then I go, or not a Diet Coke, obviously, but a regular Coke that has a bunch of sugar in it, and I go sit at my desk all day long? The cells are going to start pulling all that that sugar in, but then I'm not doing anything to cause the cells to utilize that energy, so the cells are going to store it. And eventually, as those cells start taking in all of that sugar and all of that energy, they start saying, time out, I don't want any more of this sugar, I can't handle it, I don't need it anymore, and they start shutting down the receptors. So what's happening is that too much sugar in the system is a neurotoxin. It's directly toxic to our cells. And so the body has to do something with it. So as the sugar starts increasing, the cells are saying, don't give me any more sugar. They're shutting down those insulin receptors. Now the pancreas has to produce more insulin to try to overload those cells anyways. And we get higher levels of circulating insulin, which causes, again, a lot of these metabolic diseases. So when we're thinking about eating in our diet, we want to make sure that we're eating in a way that's going to keep our insulin levels under control. It's fine to bring our insulin levels up. That has to happen when we eat carbs, but we have to stay away from this. And if 65% of our meals are carbohydrates, we're going to be creating a lot more of a glucose load, and we're going to be creating this insulin response right here. So when we look at kind of what happens again over time, so our glucose levels, they rise, insulin production comes up, we come up and down like this all the time. Eventually we start to get this insulin resistance that takes place. It takes more and more more and more insulin production to have the same effect on sugar. Sorry, this is the glucose level. So it takes more and more insulin to have the same effect on our blood sugar. Eventually, this breaks down and starts destroying the pancreas. The pancreas can't keep up with the constant need for production. And we end up in this complete insulin regulation and dysregulated blood sugar levels. Now, the research is showing that insulin resistance can start to show up decades before diabetes shows up. So if we're looking at someone who's got clinically diagnosed diabetes with their A1C level above 6.5, this has been a lifestyle issue that didn't just happen overnight. It's been happening for years. So when we're looking at labs and things in the office, one of the biggest things we're trying to understand is, what does this look like? Because if we can catch it here and nip it in the butt, it's going to be way better than if we wait till it gets all the way over here. So when we're thinking about diet, again, we want to be eating in a diet in a way that's supporting healthy insulin levels and blood sugar regulation, that's not going to feed into this graph here. Now, if we look at this kind of cycle that we get into, we eat food, the body produces insulin, our cells start to resist that insulin, like what we just talked about. We start to then store that sugar as fat, because again, sugar is directly toxic to the body if it's in too high of levels in the blood. So if the cells start pushing that sugar away, we can't just have an increase in blood sugar. What we have to do is then start storing that. So the liver converts that into something called triglycerides, and it stores it as fat. Triglycerides are a fat or an energy storage system, basically. And the liver starts to store that, we get fatty liver, or we start to lay down a bunch of adipose tissue. If we're trying to get rid of weight and clear out adipose tissue, and we think about adipose tissue as being stored energy, well, if the body doesn't ever need any more energy because we're constantly taking in sugar, we're never going to get rid of those sugar stores. The body has no reason to do that. So increased sugar stores, we start to gain weight. The weight makes us feel tired and hungry. We eat more food, and we just get stuck in this cycle right here. So that's where no sugar challenge, we kind of just put up with a bunch of really bad symptoms for a while, but it helps us break us out of this tired and hungry, eat food cycle that we get stuck in. So this research article right here just kind of talks about this insulin and growth hormone shift that promotes energy storage. And then you can see down here, hyperinsulinemia is an important etiological factor, which means it underlies the development of metabolic syndromes, type 2 diabetes, cardiovascular disease, cancer, and premature mortality. So anybody think these aren't that big of a deal? Well, if we want to know exactly how much of a big deal these are, this was 2021's all-cause mortality list. I should have updated this because we probably have access to the 2023 data now, but I didn't, so sorry. Heart disease, 695,000 deaths in the US. Cancer come in second place at 605. This is obviously during a COVID year. We'll talk about COVID in just a second, but 400,000 COVID deaths, right? Accidents, stroke, which goes back into heart disease, right? That's all cardiovascular disease. Lower respiratory diseases, Alzheimer's, we'll talk about diabetes, chronic liver disease, and cirrhosis. Again, too much sugar can cause chronic liver disease. It can cause fatty liver, and then kidney issues. So if we look at the total number of deaths here that fit into that metabolic syndrome, or fit into what we just looked at can be caused by hyperinsulinemia, it's 1.56 million deaths in a single year in the United States. If we compare that to the total all-cause mortality in the United States, not just the top 10 here, but just the total number of deaths in the United States, that number alone makes up 45.2% of the deaths in the United States that could directly be tied back into insulin. Now, is insulin the only thing that's causing that? Obviously not, but there's research that shows how insulin leads to the progression of these diseases that make up 45.2%. Now, talked about COVID as well. What's the biggest risk factor or indicating factor of how your body's going to deal with COVID? Weight, immunity, diseases, right? So it's pre-existing factors. It's very rare that someone who's healthy and doesn't have these pre-existing conditions is going to get COVID and end up dying. It's the people who are dying are the ones who are already sick, right? So the biggest risk factors are the metabolic diseases, the diabetes, the heart disease, that type of stuff, right? So if we lump the COVID deaths in with that, it brings us up to 48.7. Sorry, I think this number is if I add in, let me see here. This is if we add in Alzheimer's disease. COVID's the next one. Because Alzheimer's disease is widely regarded now as type 3 diabetes. We know, again, sugar is directly toxic to the nervous system. As we have too much sugar circulating, it starts to affect the memory centers in our brain. This is not new, but by the time we start to have the decline, it's too late. So again, when I'm looking at labs, we talked about that insulin chart. I'm not waiting till things get worse. I'm trying to look at where your body's at now and how that's going to have an impact on your health in 20 or 30 years from now, not just what can we do to get you feeling better right now. So 48.7 comes up if we lump in Alzheimer's with that, because there is a lot of research showing the result of sugar on the brain. This is if we lump in COVID now with the Alzheimer's, we're up to 60.7% of the deaths in the United States in a single year could potentially be related back to insulin, diabetes, and blood sugar dysregulation, which is something that we have direct control over, except for the population that's type 1 diabetes. That's an autoimmune condition, but I'm talking about type 2 diabetes here, which is 100% diet and lifestyle, right? There's probably people in the comments section that'll get mad at me for saying that. I don't really care. Figure it out and make some changes, right? This is obviously a big deal. And the reason for it is because we're eating the standard American diet, which, as we know, gives you the standard American diseases and makes you very sad, right? So if the way we've been taught is not the correct way to eat, then what do we need to eat? How many people who have tried to lose weight have been told it's just calories in, calories out? If you want to lose weight, just cut the calories. Okay. Well, we know that that's not true. We've known that for the 75 years, but for some reason we keep giving the same bad advice. So they did a study during World War I of them. It's called the Minnesota Starvation Experiment. There's a lot of stuff to remember. I don't know which World War it was. I'm sure someone could tell me the dates and make me look. I see, history buff right there. So basically what they did was they took 36 conscientious objectors in 1944, and they wanted to find out what was going to happen to their soldiers overseas when they put them on war rations, because they couldn't afford to feed all their soldiers over there. So they were trying to figure out what happens if we start to cut their calories back a little bit. So they took these guys, their average caloric intake was 3,200 calories a day, which got 36 guys and their average intake is 3,200. That's way higher already. That's already 150% of what we're told our average caloric intake rate should be, right, with a 2,000 calorie diet. They dropped them down to 1,570 calories a day. Now, because they were trying to stimulate war rations, these were going to be carbohydrate-rich and protein-poor meals because that's what they were able to get over to the soldiers there. Now, again, they were doing this to check how the soldiers were going to respond. So they did require them to maintain their active lifestyle, which if we're trying to lose weight, everybody knows we probably need to be active, right? No one's ever tried to lose weight and then gone and sit on the couch and then, right? We all know that that's not going to work. So we want to be able to eat a diet that's going to allow us to stay active. And so they had to do 22 miles of walking each week, which really isn't that much. If you're walking 3 miles a day, you're going to get to 22 miles, right? So the results, 21% reduction in strength. The men felt old and constantly tired. Politics, sex, and romance lost their appeal. And food became the overwhelming priority. They started obsessively reading cookbooks and looking at food, pictures of food with pornographic obsession. So anybody who wants to go on a weight loss journey, would you be happy if those were your results? I mean, no. I mean, I look at food like that. I love food, but that's not really what I would be going for if I was on a diet, right? So physiologically, what happened is their heart rate slowed from an average of 55 to 35. So we saw a significant reduction in metabolic activity. Their metabolism slowed to conserve calories. Bowel movement frequency dropped. Their blood volume dropped by 10%. Their heart shrank in size. They got swollen in the ankles, knees, and faces. And they dealt with dizziness, muscle soreness, ringing in the ears, reduced coordination, whitening of the eyeballs as blood vessels shrank in the eyes, and they felt cold all the time. Again, how many people want that on their weight loss journey? No. And this is actually what one of the participants looked like at the end of the study. So they had 12 subjects that stayed on after the study. And what they basically did was, what can we do to now reintegrate these guys and try to get their health back? So on average, they ended up coming back to a 5,000 calorie a day diet on an unrestricted diet. So they were unrestricted. They ended up eating an average of 5,000 calories a day. So we yo-yoed the other direction. How many people have dealt with the yo-yo of it's really restrictive and now I'm just going to go off the rails the other direction? Some of them ate as many as 11,000 calories a day, and they had a hunger they couldn't satisfy. Now, in 2003, 19 of the 36 were still alive. They were interviewed, and they said they still had lingering after effects of the experiment, and they were haunted by the fact that food might be taken away from them. So this guy, 24.5% weight loss, which is typical. That is not healthy. So am I saying calories don't matter? Of course, I'm not saying calories don't matter. Calories do matter, but what's more important is that we start to think a little bit differently and understand that there's way more than just calories in and calories out when it comes to trying to lose weight and trying to diet and eat healthy. So what even is a calorie then? Because if we're going to spend this much time talking about calories, you better at least know what it is. So basically a calorie is a unit of measurement of heat. It's the amount of energy it takes to raise a gram of water by 1 degree Celsius. So it's literally just a measure of thermal activity or the energy that's stored within our food. When we're talking about calories with food, we're really talking about kilocalories. So again, I don't want some nutritionists on there to jump in the comments section and holler at me for using the wrong calorie term, but I'm not going to say kilocalorie every time. Just know that's what we're talking about, right? So again, it's literally just the amount of heat. When they want to try to figure out how many calories are in a cup of rice, what you would do is you would put it in a sealed container and you'd light it on fire and figure out how much it changed the temperature, right? So you can do those experiments in labs. They're kind of cool. So now that we know the calories, what are we supposed to eat? So we want to talk about the difference between calories that are eaten and calories that are burned. So now we're going to talk about calories at 3 different places. Talk about calories at the mouth or calories that we're eating. This is what you look at when you're reading a nutrition facts label. So how many calories are in the food? That is not the same as the number of calories that are absorbed, and it's definitely not the same as the number of calories that actually make it into our cells. So I think I made a big point during the first talk that I don't care about what you've been told before, what your nutritionist tells you, what your food scientist tells you. What I'm focused on is what's happening at the cellular level from a metabolic physiology standpoint. So again, we talked about the difference between a food scientist, everything that happens from the food from the time it is pulled from the ground to the time it hits the plate. The nutritionist is everything that is concerned from the plate to the mouth. And then a metabolic physiologist is concerned about what happens once it gets inside the mouth and acts on the cellular level. So I'm focused when we're talking about all of this and when we're trying to set up a healthy diet for you is what's going to support your cells and your body's physiology. So there's 4 different things that have calories. We got carbohydrates, proteins, fats. The 4th one is alcohol. We're not talking about alcohol in a healthy diet, so we're not going to talk about that today. But carbohydrates have 4 kilocalories per gram, so that's what that kcal is. So for every gram of carbohydrates we're going to create 4 kilocalories worth of energy within the body. Proteins are 4 kcals per gram, and fats are 9. So if we looked at this just right away, what could we eat that's going to give our bodies the most energy? Fat, right? So wouldn't it make sense to just eat a diet full of fat that's going to give us a ton of energy? Yeah. However, it's harder to get the energy out of fat than it is to get the energy out of carbohydrates. See, our bodies physiologically run on glucose. Everything's converted into glucose. It's like the currency of energy within the body. And so carbohydrates get broken down directly into glucose. Fats get broken into ketones and things like that, fatty acids that then get broken and converted into glucose. So it takes a little bit more time. It's harder. So when we talked about no sugar, creating that metabolic flexibility, your body's not used to using fat for fuel because there's so much glucose that's readily available all the time. So we never have to activate those other energy systems. That's why you feel terrible when you start no sugar, because your body doesn't know how to utilize those energy systems. And then you start feeling better towards the end. I bet there's less people who want to rip my head off now than there were 3 or 4 weeks ago, right? Because your body gets used to that metabolic flexibility. So because we can now burn fat for fuel, we're going to have a higher quality energy source that can sustain us for a longer period of time. Now, calories eaten, calories at the mouth, this is not what actually gets absorbed into the body. So one of the things we have to take into consideration is how much energy, well, that's the next thing. So we'll talk about what gets absorbed. So one of the big things is fiber, right? So how many people have heard of fiber, the difference between total carbs, net carbs, all that stuff? So there's fiber. We talked about this exact slide last time too. We've got our different fiber chains. These are all chains of glucose. So things like cellulose, this is our fiber over here, that's insoluble, which means it's not going to get absorbed across your membrane. So while this does carry glucose molecules and it does have a caloric content, your body's not absorbing it, so it doesn't count for calories that our body's going to utilize. This cellulose or this fiber is very important because that feeds all the 100 trillion bacteria that we have in our gut, right? So when we look at an ingredient label, right away we can see calories from carbohydrates, proteins, fats. Carbs are going to have that soluble and insoluble fiber piece. We can right away subtract the grams of fiber away from that and reduce it by 4. So we have 20 grams of carbs and there's 5 grams of fiber in there. We can reduce 20 calories off the total calories. So 20 grams of carbs will give you 80 calories, but only 15 of those are absorbed. So we would reduce that by 20, right? And we would have 60 grams of calories in the body, essentially. The next thing we look at is the thermic effect of food. So it takes energy to do everything. So one of the things it takes energy for is to actually break down and digest your food. If I eat a Snickers bar doesn't get absorbed into my bloodstream. I have to chew it up. My stomach has to do work. My intestines have to move around and all these muscles have to activate in order to bring that into my blood. And so all the energy it takes your body to absorb the food and bring it into your body is considered that thermic effect of food. Now, not all foods have the same thermic effect. So if we look at carbohydrates have about a 15% thermic effect, which means 100 grams of carbohydrates is now 85 grams, or 100 calories from carbs at the mouth is 85 calories, goodness gracious, it's gonna be a long night. 85 calories when we get absorbed into our body, because those other 15 calories went purely to the energy expenditure of absorbing the carbohydrates. Proteins have the highest thermic effect, 25 to 30, and fats are the lowest at 0 to 4%. So I swear I always make the joke about the meat sweats. Who knows what the meat sweats are? Greg knows the meat sweats. You go to a barbecue, you eat a bunch of protein, and you feel like a little hot and sweaty. Well, the thermic effect of food is huge on that. So there's a big change in metabolic rate that has to take place in order for your body to utilize that protein. So when we look then at, we started with on the plate, Your food scientist, your nutritionist is telling you there's 4 calories per gram of carbs, proteins, and 9 grams for fats. Well, once that actually gets absorbed, those same 4 calories turn into 3.4 calories of carbohydrates, 2.8 calories of protein, and 8.82 calories of fat. So if you need 2,000 calories a day, and you start by counting 2,000 calories on your plate, by the time it gets into your body, we have way less than that, right? So we're already going to be putting ourselves in a deficit just because we don't know what we're looking at, right? Next thing we talk about is what are the calories that are actually utilized in the body. So carbohydrates, again, are broken and converted into glucose molecules. This is the fastest form of energy. And if this glucose is not utilized, it's then converted in the body and stored as fats. Proteins are broken down into amino acids, which is why a lot of times when you go to do workouts and things like that, you'll take an amino acid supplement. It's the broken down form of the protein, so your body can utilize that quicker. These are used to build muscles, enzymes, signaling molecules, all that type of stuff. And protein ideally would be the last source of energy metabolism in your body. So ideally, under normal situations, we're not going to start utilizing protein for energy unless we absolutely have to. Now, how many people know that injectable thing that people start to get to lose weight? There's originally a diabetes drug. There's a bunch of different types of it. Ozempic, semaglutide, tirzepatide, all that stuff, right? So that's a GLP-1 agonist. Causes a delayed absorption of glucose in your stomach and your small intestine. One of the big problems with that is people will lose a bunch of weight, but a huge portion of that is coming from protein because we're not doing it the way the body was designed to do. We're not doing anything to help support cellular physiology. We're just manipulating the body, and we get a huge loss in muscle mass. A lot of times that's associated with that. Fats here, fats are broken down into free fatty acids. Fats are really important in our diet. If we have a fat-free diet, we're going to be significantly lacking in our fat-soluble vitamins, which are vitamins A, D, E, and K. That's also important for signaling molecules, cellular integrity. The cell membrane of every cell in our body is made up of a phospholipid bilayer, which is basically a protein and 2 fatty acids. So if we don't have protein, we don't have fatty acids, we can't produce that cellular membrane. Cholesterol is the other name for that, right? So if we don't have enough cholesterol, we can't heal our body. Fats, although they do provide more energy, are a slower energy source. And these are going to circulate and, again, get stored if they're not used, right? So how many people think fat makes you fat? Well, fat is fat, right? But it's not too much fat that makes you fat. It's an overabundance of energy that's not being utilized that then gets stored as fat. I don't know why this is in here again. Okay, so essential fatty acids, essential amino acids. How many people have heard of those? Essential fatty acids are basically those fatty acids. Essential means we have to get it from our diet because the body can't synthesize it. Essential amino acids are amino acids we have to get from our diet because the body can't produce it on its own. There's 20 total amino acids, 9 of them are essential, which means that those other ones, if you have the non-essential amino acids, your body can move things around on to produce when it needs it, but these 9 it can't produce on its own. So we've got essential fats and we've got essential proteins. How many people have ever heard of an essential carbohydrate? I've never heard of an essential carbohydrate because it's not essential for living. If you don't eat protein, you don't eat fat, you will die. If you don't eat carbohydrates, you're not going to die because your body can produce it from those other 2 things. So right away, we need to kind of break ourselves out of this mindset of 65% carbs. There's no reason we have to eat any carbs. Now, some people's metabolic physiology is so messed up, they can't do some of this other conversion, and they need some carbs. But there's no such thing as an essential carb. So just clear the air on that. All right, so I hope I've thoroughly confused you guys. So now we can talk about what we need to do to eat properly. So again, everything that I'm talking about is cellular physiology. What can we do to avoid creating an insulin spike? What can we do to avoid insulin resistance? And what can we do to maximize the cell's efficiency? So we talked about carbohydrates. This is measuring your blood glucose levels. How long does it take your blood glucose to spike after a meal? Carbohydrates are going to have a huge increase in blood glucose. Proteins and fats will still alter your blood sugar, so it's not going to have zero impact. But what happens is it happens over such a delayed period of time that the body creates a normal, healthy insulin response to that. So what can we do right away if we're going to eat carbohydrates? Well, if you pair carbohydrates with proteins or with fats, it's going to blunt that blood sugar response. So right away, we're going to have less of an insulin response because of that. So number one thing is if you are going to eat carbs, always try to pair carbohydrates with proteins and fats. Don't just sit down and have a huge bowl of pasta. Eat some chicken with it or something, right? So that we are going to blunt that blood sugar response as much as possible. So we talk about what to eat. The easiest way to think about this is on a normal day. When I say a normal day, I mean a day that you're not doing some sort of structured exercise. Let's eat real food. That means things that have an ingredient label of 1, or you can read every ingredient label on it. Let's shop around the outside of the store. If it's got a fancy ingredient label, if it's got a ton of colors on it, they're probably a marketing company trying to flash you and get your attention. Eat more good fat. Let's focus on lean proteins and collagen, tons of veggies, and maybe some fruit. Now, on days that we're working out, this is where we can start to increase our carbohydrate load. And we'll talk about that from the standpoint of blood sugar regulation. Let me see if I got to go back a slide or if we're going to talk about it in the future. All right, so we'll go back all the way to the beginning to talk about exercise really quick because I don't want to get super bogged down into it. But we think about our normal, this bar right here, that's our normal blood sugar. We want to try to keep our blood sugar at, right? If we go too high, we're going to then come crashing back down. So if we think about eating a meal is going to increase our blood sugar, right? Now, what we talked about during the last thing, I believe, is that muscle tissue can utilize sugar outside of our normal insulin response. So if I'm going to go to the gym and work out and use my muscles, those muscles are programmed to be able to take in that sugar from the bloodstream without having to create that huge spike in insulin. So if we're trying to keep ourselves normal and we want to increase strength, if we're trying to build strength, we need to make sure that our muscles have enough sugar to be able to fully contract and then heal and repair afterwards. So we can utilize a high carbohydrate meal right before our exercise to increase our blood sugar, knowing we're not going to get a crazy insulin response because we're going to then activate all those muscles to pull that sugar back into that normal range. The second side of that is if we're trying to create a deficit because we're trying to burn fat, now what we can do is we can exercise. At the end, we're going to end up in this hypoglycemic state because our blood sugar started normal. We dropped it low because of our exercise. And now if we're not focused on strength gains, but we're focused on trying to lose fat, what we can do is we can wait for our body to replenish this glucose supply by utilizing fat and converting it into glucose. The muscles will take that blood sugar back in, and then they'll start to heal and repair. However, this is where it comes to what are your health goals? Because if my goal is to be able to bench 250 pounds and gain a bunch of muscle, and your goal is to lose 20 pounds, and we eat the same and exercise the same, we're not both going to hit our goals. So we've got to be able to design this with an understanding of what's happening metabolically and physiologically within our bodies. That makes sense? You guys all with me so far? All right, where were we? Oh yeah, so what are we supposed to eat? That's the question of the night. So when it talks about proteins, one of the big things we also want to focus on is what's happening not only from a calorie standpoint, but food is really fueling our body. Everything that happens in our body is pathways. Those pathways are all run by vitamins and minerals and nutrients and things like that. So we've got to make sure that we're giving our body all of those nutrients it needs to support and run those pathways. So what's the most nutrient-dense food on the planet? It's written on the top line. Organ meats. How many people eat organ meats? It's because you guys listen. That's what's up. I got a good crowd here. How many people's friends eat organ meats? Yeah, probably not. Your friends?
Yes.
All right, you got good friends. That's good. You know, they say you're the average of your 5 closest friends. So if your friends eat organs, it means you're going to be healthier, right?
Best friend's a vegan, so definitely.
Okay, you should find a new best friend.
I haven't talked to her about organ meats yet.
Okay, that's probably going to be a stretch. But if we think about like our ancestors, not even our ancestors, but think about animals. You got a lion hunting a gazelle. Lion takes down this gazelle. What's the first thing they're going for? Yeah, they're going to go for the organs because they intuitively know that that's where all the nutrients are at. Animals don't eat for pleasure. We're the only species that eats for pleasure. Every other animal just eats to survive. And if you're trying to eat to survive, you're going to go for the most nutrient-dense tissue first, which is why they're ripping open the intestines and they're going for all those organs. And then they go start chomping on the leg meat and stuff, right? Pasture-raised foods, 100% grass-fed, grass-finished meat. This is a really important one. It's got to be 100% grass-fed, grass-finished. If it doesn't say 100%, and if it doesn't say grass-finished, it just means that they basically fed it grass for 90% of its life, and then they fed it a bunch of grain to fatten it up for the 10% before they took it to slaughter. The problem with that, and the reason that grass-fed, grass-finished is so important, is because the fat tissue that the animal is made of is a representation of its diet. So if the animals are eating all grass, or if grass-eating animals like cows and bison and venison and that type of stuff are eating grass, their fat is going to be much higher in omega-3 fatty acids, which are anti-inflammatory. When we have conventionally raised animals, they're much higher in omega-6 fatty acids, which are inflammatory. So when you talk about all these vegetarians and vegans screaming from the mountaintops that meat's going to kill you, well, they're not looking at the quality of the meat. They're just looking at meat in general. And if you're eating a high-protein diet full of conventionally raised meat, yeah, it's pretty high in inflammatory fatty acids. You probably don't want to be doing that. But if you're really careful about the quality of your meat, it's very good for you. It's one of the most nutrient-dense things that you can eat. So I buy all my meat online. I can give you guys the links to that later. But it's really important that we get good quality meat. Now, one of my favorite things is when patients ask me if they should eat grass-fed chicken. It's like, no, don't eat grass-fed chicken because chickens don't eat grass. So that wouldn't make sense. But you want pasture-raised or wild forage chicken. You don't want cage-free. Cage-free means they shove 1,000 chickens into a space this big. Just as many problems as if they were in cage. You want that actual pasture-raised. Wild-caught when it comes to fish. One of the other big things with animal proteins versus vegan or vegetarian proteins is the bioavailability. So we talk about the amount of calories or whatever it is on the plate, at the mouth, and inside the body. Well, the bioavailability of animal protein is around 90%. Eggs are one of the highest bioavailable sources of protein you can get, which is why they're so good for you if you don't have an egg allergy. Plant protein is down to 50 to 80%. So that's one of the big reasons that you see plant-based protein shakes have 1,000 different ingredients in them, because they're trying to match the nutrient content of animal protein. And they're also trying to throw a bunch of proteins in there to create a complete protein, which means it has a full amino acid profile and has all 9 of your essential amino acids. We could just skip that BS of adding 1,000 things together if we just ate organ meats, right? When it comes to fats, wild-caught fish, very good in fat or healthy fats. Again, wild-caught. One of the big things with fish is heavy metal toxicity. So you've got to make sure your fish is coming from an actual wild source in a place that you would swim in. And make sure if you're getting like all of these really high omega-3 fishes like sardines and anchovies and tuna and stuff like that, they will do heavy metal testing on it. So you want to make sure, especially if you're buying like canned tuna or canned fish, that it says low mercury fish. I just had sardines for the first time the other day. Actually not as scary as I thought they were going to be. They were very tasty. But if you look at like how many grams of omega-3s per 200, okay, it's just per 200 calories, we've got a ton up here, not as much down in some of our legumes and veggies. So we want to make sure that we're getting really good quality sources of animal proteins that are coupled with fats. We want to be avoiding seed oils and avoid high omega-6 fats. So again, omega-6 fats are going to be your inflammatory fatty acids. Omega-3s are anti-inflammatory. So carbohydrates, again, we're going to do our simple carbohydrates around workouts. So berries, syrup, dates, figs, bananas, fruit, that type of stuff, because we want to create that blood sugar spike. If we want to gain muscle mass, again, this all comes back to what are your health goals, because that's what we kind of talked about. If your goal is to lose weight, then you don't want to be ingesting a huge glucose load or huge carbohydrate load that's going to bring your sugar back up, because then again, your body never has to use that stored energy. So we want to be able to use our body's stored energy. If our goal is to build a bunch of strength, well, then we want to make it as readily available as possible for those muscles to reabsorb that sugar at the end of the workout so that they can then start that healing process. We want to pair our complex carbohydrates with proteins and fat. Again, that's going to blunt that insulin response and blunt that glycemic load. Avoid enriched grains. Things that have cyanocobalamin and folic acid should be avoided like the plague. We want to avoid gluten as much as possible. Gluten basically acts like an infection, causes leaky gut, precursor for all sorts of autoimmune conditions and stuff. Excuse me, stuff like that. So really make sure we're avoiding gluten there. If you are going to eat bread, sourdough is a much better option because the fermentation process breaks down the gluten particles. So, with me so far? Okay. Did I just describe a keto diet?
Yeah.
Kind of, not really. What I gave you is much more specific. Keto diets are more generically high protein, high fat, and they do also have big restrictions on carbohydrates. So we'll talk about when it comes to calculating what your actual caloric need is, percentages, how much of each thing to be eating. I don't really care that much about the total grams of carbohydrates. It's when are we consuming them? What are we getting that's coupled with that? And I'm also, keto diets are also not specific on where that fat needs to come from. So a lot of people end up doing dirty keto, and they just eat a bunch of cheese and dairy products and things like that that are super inflammatory. Carnivore diet is awesome, I think, for a lot of people, as long as we're paying attention to where that protein and fat is coming from. There are 0 carbs on a carnivore diet. It's literally just meat. I have a bunch of guys that do really good on carnivore. I think it's good for a short period of time, but it's not a very sustainable long-term diet. Carnivore has no fruits and no veggies allowed. All right, so now how much am I supposed to actually eat? So we did talk about calories in, calories out. I want to focus more now on calories eaten, or calories at a metabolic level versus calories that we're actually burning. So it depends on your goals. Are you trying to lose weight? Are you trying to gain muscle? Are you trying to just stay the same? Our goals have to change based on that. And so that's where we can increase or decrease either how much we're taking in or how much we're expending. But we can't do neither one of those, right? So we look at our caloric expenditure now. So we just talked a bunch about calories in and calories eaten. Now we're going to talk about calories out, because we have to expend calories also if we want to be able to use our stored energy, which is fat. So we look at the thermal effect of food. We talked about that. That makes up about 10% of your total caloric intake if we average 0 to 4% for fats, 25 to 30% for protein, and 10 to 15% for carbs. We kind of average it out to 10% across the board. 5% comes from exercise. 25% comes from this really cool thing called NEAT, which is what we're all doing right now, which is non-exercise activity thermogenesis. That's everything between surviving and intentional structured exercise. And then we have our basal metabolic rate, which is everything it takes us to not die. Heart beating, brain working, lungs breathing, all of that stuff, right? What most people don't understand is our basal metabolic rate is about 65% of our total caloric intake, and it's way higher than what people think. So what happens is our body doesn't start here and then allocate calories out. Calories are allocated here first, and then here if we have anything left over, which is why a lot of people who go on a starvation diet, like what happened in that starvation experiment, end up with a bunch of really bad negative side effects. Their metabolic rate slows down. They don't lose any weight. Sometimes they'll gain weight. Women especially struggle with a loss in their menstrual cycle and stuff because their body starts shutting down some of these metabolic processes to save energy. If I don't eat enough calories, you think my body cares more about, not my body, but a female's body cares more about a menstrual cycle or your heart beating? Right, we're going to prioritize certain metabolic functions. We don't ever want to be in a position where our body is prioritizing metabolic functions. So at the very least, we have to have enough energy for our basal metabolic rate to happen. So one of the really cool things, like with bears that go through hibernation, bears get really, really fat and then they sleep all winter long. Bears' metabolic rate can drop by about 80%, but a bear has a bunch of fat that they stored. They lose it all while they're staying alive, and then they come out really skinny, right? So they had a huge energy storage that they're then able to utilize, right? We don't have that. We can't hibernate. So first thing we have to calculate is everybody's basal metabolic rate. This is really simple to calculate. I'm sure I've done this for some of you guys in the office. This was mine from last year, so I didn't change anything. I'm a couple pounds heavier now. But at 30, 5'11", 160, my basal metabolic rate was 1,700 calories. So if it takes me 1,700 calories every single day not to die, and I'm only eating a 2,000 calorie diet, that only gives me 300 calories for literally everything else. And if 10% of that's coming from food, or my thermal effect of food, I'm losing 200. Now I only have 100 calories. It doesn't take me very much effort to burn 100 calories and get to the point that now I'm going to start burning into that basal metabolic rate. Now, it's fine if we have a bunch of stored energy. I don't have a bunch of stored energy, so I'm not going to be feeling very good. My goal is not to lose weight, obviously, when we go through and talk about some of this. So let's say we start with my basal metabolic rate here at 1,708 calories. Now, how much is coming from exercise? Well, this is the most variable thing. You can't change your basal metabolic rate on a day-to-day basis. You can't change how much energy it takes for food. And you're probably not changing the amount of things that you're doing from a work standpoint, a driving your car standpoint, things like that, right? So I wear an activity tracker. It tells me exactly how many calories I burn during a specific activity. If you don't have an activity tracker, you could get one. They're awesome. I love my Whoop strap. This will actually tell me how many calories I burn throughout the day. I wake up first thing in the morning at 6 o'clock and I've already burned 700 calories sleeping. So most people don't realize what their calorie expenditure is. So having something like this can be very helpful. So I just went to this one. I have two trackers. This was from last year. I could have probably, again, updated this, but I just looked at a couple rounds of golf I played. 18 holes of golf, I burned 700 to 800 calories. Half marathon, 1,400 calories. 4-mile run, 500 calories. 45-minute strength training session, 250 to 30 calories. So if I go out and I play, I think for this calculation, I did it. If I went for a 4-mile run in the morning and then I went and played 18 holes of golf in the afternoon, it's not uncommon for me to do that. My calorie need for the day to just stay where I'm at is my BMR plus the energy from the exercise. And then we have to add in the thermic effect of food and the NEAT here. So now thermic effect of food is sitting right here. So when we talked about the thermic effect, the carbohydrates going from 4 grams to 3.8, just use 4, 4, and 9 for this because you're picking up the thermic effect of food right here. If you're going to delete this step, then you know you need to go add that back in, right? So you don't have to do it twice. So I got 1,708 calories, 800 plus 500. So that means without the thermic effect of food or NEAT, I'm at 3,000 calories. I'm already 150% over what they told me on the ingredient label of the Snickers bar, right? So 3,000 calories, then we'll add back in 10% and we'll add back in the NEAT. I know I'm not doing this. I'd probably get slaughtered by my algebra teacher or whatever for not adding percentages incorrectly, but it gets me at 4,150 calories. How many people had a heart attack? Their doctor told them they needed 4,150 calories on a Saturday not to die or not to lose weight, right? To just stay the same. So if my goal is to lose weight, I got to eat somewhere less than this, but I can't eat less than this or this. And if I want to gain weight or gain muscle or really be able to repair from my workout, I got to eat more than this. So when we talk about athletes are always trying to optimize their athletic performance, which means we have to combine training, recovery, and resilience. So if I go out and train like this and I don't eat enough calorie, my recovery is going to decline because of that. And my resilience is going to go down as well because I'm not absorbing that training. And then I'm going to end up getting injured or I'm going to sacrifice my performance. So these are all really important things to know. You need to know what your numbers are. Now, am I telling you to be a psychopath about counting calories? No. Being a psycho about counting calories adds more stress to your life. And what was one of the things I said I want to work on is creating a healthy relationship with food. So do it for a couple weeks, do it for a couple scenarios, get an understanding of what this looks like for you, because everybody's numbers are different. I could calculate it for all of us. None of us are the same. So go through and do the math and figure out what it is for you. And then figure out if I'm really active, I need to be around this. If I'm not so active, I need to be around this. And then count your calories in your food for a little bit and figure out, well, how much does it take to get to this number and how much does it take to get to this number? And then just get somewhere close, right? If you're someone who's fine with just adding every single thing you eat into a fitness tracker, it's totally fine. That's not my thing. So I'm not going to tell you to make it your thing either. So if we look at now so I got to get 4,150 calories in. Now, where is that supposed to come from? If we look at this based on the body, well, the composition of the brain, which is the most important organ, is 61% fat, 35% protein, and only 4% carbohydrates. So already it doesn't make any sense to eat 65% carbohydrates. If you look at the composition of the body, we're at 35% fat, 45% protein, 5% carbs, and a bunch of other stuff, right? So if we were to eat something that looked more like this, would that make a little bit more sense? Now, this is not 30 grams of carbohydrates. It's not keto. It's just 10%. And that 10% varies. So if we went back to my 4,150 calories a day, 55% of that. Now, number one thing without looking over here, everybody always thinks if you're supposed to eat 55% fat, they think it's so much fat. But remember, this is looking at calories, and there's more than double the amount of calories in fat than there is in protein and carbohydrates. So that 55% of my calories coming from fat equates to 253 grams of fat in a day. For protein, it's 363 grams, and for carbs, it's 75 grams. Now, the caveat here, which I didn't really think about until this year, so I'm glad you guys got to come to this talk, is this was a high exercise day. So this would have been a day I added in more carbs because I exercised a bunch more. But whatever. Figure out what this is here, right? It's way different probably than what we would have thought. And I'm way above 30 grams. So again, we're not in a keto diet here. We're just in a support our body's physiology diet. All right, last couple slides here. So now when am I supposed to be eating this food, you say? Who's familiar with intermittent fasting? Intermittent fasting? Most of us. So intermittent fasting is not really fasting at all. It's just timed eating. The way the body works basically is you're going to start running off of your energy from your last meal. If I eat at 5 o'clock, the next 6 hours of my day, I'm just running off of the energy that I got from that meal. From hour 6 to hours 14, you're using energy from your blood sugar. And at hour 14, this is where we dip down a little bit. And we start actually getting into fat storage to maintain that blood sugar levels. So if you're doing intermittent fasting and you're only fasting for a 14-hour interval, you're not really doing anything at all to get into your fat storage. So this is what I always tell people. Intermittent fasting, your benefit starts at 14 hours. Every hour that you can do after that adds benefit. So a lot of people do a 16-hour fasting window to start, which is basically noon to 8 p.m. you eat. But if you can push that window back or bring it up and do a noon to 6 p.m. intermittent fasting, well, the difference between 16 hours and 18 hours isn't that much, but the hours of actual benefit are doubling. So it does make a big difference if you can extend that intermittent fasting window. Some of the benefits here: weight loss, lower cholesterol, improved blood sugar, less inflammation, improved cognition, and prevention against neurodegenerative diseases. Those are all pretty good things, right? So who is allowed to do intermittent fasting? I'm so glad you guys asked. Males, always fast all the time. Go do it. Females, sometimes fast, probably not. Depends on your hormonal and adrenal health. It's typically better to eat early and skip the last meal of the day, which a lot of females don't do. And you should always talk to your TWW doc first, because we can run labs and see where you're at. The reality is that being in a fasted state increases your cortisol, which is a stress hormone. That's what helps your body create more blood sugar. If you're already really stressed, do you think I want you being fasted and adding more stress into your life? Probably not. So talk to us. We'll take a look at things, and then we can have that conversation. Guys, pretty much always go, go, go. One of my kind of blanket recommendations for guys is intermittent fasting, 4 to 5 days a week, 24-hour fast once a month, and a 3-day water fast once a quarter, depending on your goals and what your deal is. I would evaporate if I did that. That's probably just an excuse. I should just do it, but I could tell you guys to do it, and I don't have to, right? All right. So can I do a longer fast? I already talked about that. Females probably just don't do it. You'd have to be a really special place to be able to do a longer term fast. For guys, though, doing fasting like that, 24-hour fast once a month and 72 hours once a quarter, improved testosterone, decreased inflammation, decreased brain fog. And for guys, a lot of times they want to stop for the first 28 or 24 to 48 hours because they get really bad hunger pains and feel miserable. And then usually I have guys come in on day 3 and say, can I keep eating? And the answer is yes, because once that hunger pain goes away, your body's now getting into that fat burning storage, and you can fast until you feel hungry again. So I always tell people, once you get past that initial hunger pain stage, if you want to continue fasting, just fast until you start to feel hungry. That's your body recalibrating and saying it wants energy back. You guys know what the longest fast was in all of recorded history? 41 days. Wow, that would be from the Bible, right?
Yeah.
465 days, I believe.
Oh, wow, really? Yeah.
There's a guy that did it. Now, he had significant medical support during that. He was taking nutritional supplements, but he lost a couple 100 pounds doing that. And then one day he just felt hungry and he ate. So, all right. So what else can we do to help support this regular routine diet? Well, number one is we can support digestion. So we want to make sure our body's breaking down and absorbing the food that we're putting in. If it's not, nothing else matters. We break down proteins, carbs, and fats all differently. They all get absorbed a little bit differently, and so we can support everything accordingly. When it comes to carbohydrate breakdown, bitters are very good. Bitters actually stimulate the pancreas, so it's more responsive to producing the enzymes that break down carbohydrates. One of the things I'll do is with dinner almost every night, I'll do soda water, lemon juice, and like cocktail bitters. You can get specific digestive bitters. Bitter is just a property of a lot of herbs. There's a ton of different types of bitters. But the bitters that you would use to make an old fashioned are the same as the bitters that you can use to help your digestion. Just don't go buy bitters with a bunch of artificial colors and flavorings in them. The Angostura bitters, not good.
So you could have a couple of old fashions.
A couple of soda water, lemon juice, and bitters. But if you want to put it on a big rock, you're just got selective hearing is all. Breaking down protein requires acid. The biggest thing that reduces stomach acid levels is stress. So if you're stressed all day long and you come home and sit down and eat dinner and you have a high protein meal like I told you to, probably up a creek because you're not going to be able to break the protein down very well. So adding in something like apple cider vinegar, a shot of apple cider vinegar can increase that stomach acidity, or my non-alcoholic cocktail with lemon juice, which is very acidic, can also help to aid in that. And then the big thing with fats is absorption. If you think about you spread a bunch of butter on a plate and you run it under water, well, the water is not going to absorb or to wash the butter off, so you have to use soap because soap is an emulsifier. Same thing when we absorb our fats, we've got to have an emulsifier there. The liver produces bile salts. Bile salts are stored in the gallbladder so that they can be released into the small intestine upon intake or ingestion of food. Having your gallbladder removed is the most common surgery in the US. They do about 400,000 to 500,000 a year because you don't have to have it, right? However, if you don't have it, can your digestion work properly? You can still produce the bile, but now we've just got this slow trickle of bile into the small intestine. We don't have a warehouse full of it that can just contract and squeeze when we need it. So we could go down a rabbit hole about the gallbladder, but you need to have one. If you don't have it, you need to take bile salts with every meal. So if you're someone who likes to take supplements all the time, Wellzyme, Digest Well, betaine, gallbladder complex, those can all help to aid in digestion. The other thing is we want to try to make this as easy as possible because as soon as things become more difficult, it gets thrown on the back burner. We run out of time. We don't take care of it. By the time you're hungry, it's too late to be thinking about what your next meal is, and that's when we make bad decisions. So meal prepping as much as possible. Look at your schedule ahead of time. Prepare for days when you're going to be home late, days when you're traveling, days when you're going to be somewhere else, right? And meal delivery services are a really great option for this. We were supposed to have our friends from Leo's Clean Kitchen here tonight. We use them all the time. They're an awesome meal delivery service. They did drop off some energy balls that I'm going to bring out in just a second that we can all try. And they have their information. So they are local. Husband-wife company. They'll drop food off on your door on Saturdays. You just have to order it by Wednesday. They have a different menu every week. So a lot of times what Rachel and I'll do is we'll sit down, we'll look at our schedule, and we'll say, Tuesday night, I'm going to be here till 7:30 at night. Rachel's not the cook in the house, so we need to have something simple, so we'll order meals. And when we can prepare like that,
it's a lot simpler. Or if we're gone and don't have time to meal prep lunches over the week or over the weekend, we'll get delivery so that we have healthy lunches that are available when we need them. I put cold plunging on here. I think I put cold plunging on here last time, and then every single question for like 20 minutes was about the cold plunge. But if we're talking about digestion specifically, cold plunging does directly reroute blood from your extremities into your internal organs. So it's one of the best things that you can do to increase circulation to your vital organs. I love it. I do it all the time. I have a cold plunge in my garage now. If you guys want to learn more about cold plunging, you can ask me about it. Not right now. I do also have like a 20-minute video I did on it. So you can also just go watch the video I did. There's a little bit of a financial barrier to cold plunging. However, the health benefits of it are amazing. So it is, what?
How cold does the water have to be?
The water doesn't have to be any specific temperature. You can have physiological benefits of cold plunging and psychological benefits. So if all you're looking for the psychological benefits, it just needs to be cold enough to create a little bit of anxiety before you get into it, because then you're overcoming a mental hurdle. And every time you overcome a mental hurdle, you get mentally stronger. If you're looking for the physiological benefits, something around cold enough to make you shiver is typically pretty good. I usually recommend below 50 for 11 minutes total a week. Mine at home is set to 43. That's because Rachel has been using it a little bit, and while she's pregnant, she can't go super cold. But once she's done being pregnant, I'm going to drop it down into the 30s. But you do not have to do that to get physiological benefits. However, looking at it at 45 degrees now, it doesn't create any sort of anxiety, and I just get right into it. So I'm not getting the psychological benefit of overcoming a challenge, and I want that benefit as well. So if all of this fails and you're eating perfectly and doing exactly what I said, then we need to test for roadblocks, which could be stress. It could be that you're eating things that you're allergic to. I should have put this at the very beginning because I always start with don't create inflammation in your body. So number one thing before we do any of this stuff is let's not eat foods that are creating an inflammatory response. Once we've gotten those foods out of the diet, then start doing all this stuff. If that doesn't work, test for roadblocks, hormonal imbalances, gut dysfunction, thyroid conditions, stress, all of that stuff, super, super important to make sure that we're testing for so we know what is happening in your body and we can support your specific health goals. So with that being said, any questions?
Is this available online?
Yep, I'm recording it right now.
Good, okay.
I do have a professionally recorded video on YouTube, so I can send you the link for that. But yes, you have access to it. Yep.
Yeah, so I think going back to your example of how many calories and protein you need.
Yep.
It said you need like 363 grams of protein a day.
Yeah.
Like I have a hard time just getting like 180 or something like that.
Yeah, so that's where I backed up and said the caveat here was this was a day where I played 18 holes of golf and ran 4 miles. So this was a bad example.
But even
That's
that,
my
I feel
fault.
Like if you took that out, it's still going to be around.
So what I would do is if you're going to do this, I would calculate your baseline day without any exercise. And then any additional calorie burn from exercise, bring in the form of carbohydrates. So if we look at that, okay. So if we go back to this chart here, we could basically subtract 1,300 calories from that. So 1,300 divided by 4 is 300-ish calories. 300-ish grams. I don't know what I'm trying to say. You would basically want to increase 1,300 calories worth of carbohydrates in this situation. Like one of the things when I go play golf, one of the snacks I take with me is dried mangoes. So I'm going to get a lot of carbs in there. But if we're just looking at our 3,000 or our 1,700 plus 10% plus 25%, we're like 2,100 or so. I don't have a calculator. If someone has a calculator, you can calculate what that would be. But it would probably be much closer to your 180, 200 grams. But at the same time, even if it is 4,100 grams, it is significantly more than you would think you need to eat. So you do just need to eat more food. And I would think that you and I would probably have similar health goals where you would definitely don't want to be in a deficit if you're trying to increase muscle mass, hormones, things like that.
Yeah.
So yeah, sometimes it is just
And
get your
is it
fork
even-
out and eat.
Is
But
it even possible to do intermittent fasting and then try and fit 4,000 calories? Well,
is it possible
yeah.
or is it realistic?
Is it-
The reason I stopped doing intermittent fasting was when I was training for an Ironman, because with my work schedule, I literally just couldn't eat enough calories. So I had to stop because I just was like evaporating. So if you don't have a 9 to 5 job and you can just eat all day long or in your window, that's fine. But like I can't eat when I'm seeing patients. So I can't do intermittent fasting. But also on the days when you need 4,100 calories because you're running and playing golf, just don't have that be an intermittent fasting day. Other people think it's all or nothing. It doesn't need to be intermittent fasting every single day. You can do it a couple days a week. What my old boss used to do was a 24-hour fast. He just wouldn't eat from Sunday night to dinner on Monday every week. And then he would intermittent fast a couple days a week. He was so used to it that it was fine for him.
Yeah, I was gonna ask, 'cause I saw Dr. Patrick's doing like Monday to Friday fasting.
Yeah. Me and Dr. Patrick don't have the same body type.
Yeah.
So he can sustain that a little bit longer than I can. He does that all the time, though. He's a big fasting guy. Yep.
Very interesting.
Excited?
Yeah.
I'm excited for you guys.
I think the idea of eating more is terrifying to me because I just equate that to like gaining a lot of weight.
Yeah.
But it's not the first time I've heard that.
Did I send you guys my video before, or is this the first?
No, I
No.
heard it from somebody. I worked with like a trainer before, and she's like, "You actually need to be eating like way more than you are," and that like terrifies me because
Yeah.
I feel like, I'm just gonna like blow up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If you eat a bunch of carbs,
Yes.
that may happen. But that's also why I take 2 hours not 2 hours, but an hour and 15 minutes to go through this, and not 5 minutes. And that's why I don't sit in the consult room with patients and tell them all this stuff. I make them go watch the video because you need to understand what's happening physiologically and where I'm coming from when I say this. And what you eat is the most important thing, not how much you eat. So if you just eat proteins and fats and your digestive system's working properly, you will not blow up by eating more. But again, this is me not trying to lose weight, right? But if I'm trying to lose weight, I've got to be somewhere between here and this plus this plus this, right? I can't be less than that because as soon as I start eating less calories, then my TEF plus my NEAT plus my BMR, I start pulling from my BMR, right? Because that's the last thing. Me sitting up here talking, like this is calories spent. Me eating my food, calories spent. The last place that I can then make up for that is my metabolism, and then your metabolism slows down, your thyroid gets all out of whack, your hormones start tanking. So we've got to eat at least that many calories. But if you're trying to lose weight, your body will pull that energy from fat storage. We just can't pull all of it from fat storage. So we need to find a happy medium. 800 calories a day, not a happy medium, right? Then we can look at how many calories in a pound of fat, which I think is, Kylie, do you know off the top of your head? Like 3,500 or something. So say we have 3,500 calories in a pound of fat, and I want to lose 20 pounds, and I'm going to give myself 8 months to lose it. I should have picked 10 months. 10 months. That was dumb. So I want to lose 20 pounds in 10 months. That's 2 pounds a month. That's a half a pound a week. That's 1,500 calories. Per week, I need to be in a deficit. So if I need 2,000 calories, and I've got to be in a 1,500 calorie deficit per week, that's 200 calories a day. So my 2,000 calories becomes 1,800 calories. It does not become 800 calories. You just got to get clinical about it. But when you try to bite off too much, that's when you end up messing up your physiology. And most of us who are trying to lose weight would be happy with losing 20 pounds in 10 months. Obviously, you want to lose it faster, but you don't want to have this yo-yo. You don't want to wreck your physiology because when we're working together, my goal is long-term health. So I don't really care if you lose 20 pounds in 10 months or 2 weeks. I care if you keep it off over the course of 5 or 10 years from now, right? Because health is a marathon, not a sprint. Which what?
Which is what has not been happening for me with the up and down and all around the
Yeah.
calorie deficit to intermittent fasting to trying to add.
Well, right. If your strategies are intermittent fasting, and you're a female, that's probably not a good strategy. If you're putting yourself in a huge calorie deficit, that's probably not a good strategy. So now do this strategy. It's probably a better strategy.
Sounds like it.
Cool. All right.
All right, I gotta go home and look at this video.
Lots of homework to do. So it is on my YouTube page, Dr. Connor Wolf. It's called Building the. I think the title of the video is this the perfect diet?
Okay.
I can send it to you.
Okay.
But just go look on my YouTube page.
Okay.
So, yep. All righty.
All right.
Off into the storm.